All right, let's dive right in. I am so pumped you're joining us for this explainer today because we're looking at a truly grand, unified theory of how we categorize existence itself. We're drawing directly from a fascinating trio of essays by Justin Gallant, and we're going to completely deconstruct the way we talk about the mind, the multiverse, and reality. Honestly, by just looking closely at the language we use every day, we're going to uncover how some of science's biggest, most intimidating mysteries might actually just be words playing tricks on us.
Okay, let's look at this. Are we looking at the mind and the cosmos completely backwards? We actually have this strange, almost invisible paradox in how we think about reality. When we look inward at something incredibly complex, like the human mind, we tend to compress it into one magical, indivisible entity. But then, when we look outward at the vast cosmos, we take one universe and just multiply it into many. So we're shrinking the micro and inflating the macro. And as you're going to see, we might be getting both of these completely wrong.
So here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, words that break reality. Second, the myth of one mind. Third, the myth of many universes. Fourth, the ultimate container. And finally, we'll wrap up with the triadic minimum. Starting off with Section 1, words that break reality. Think of this whole journey as a cognitive Russian nesting doll. We've got to start inside the human head. Because before we can even talk about physics or neuroscience, we have to recognize that our absolute biggest philosophical hurdles, they're often just category errors caused by our language. The foundational concept here is ontological compression. Basically, this happens when we gather a bunch of messy, wildly different processes under one neat little label. We treat that label as a real thing out in the world, and then we demand that science explain this shiny new object. It's kind of like looking at a bustling restaurant kitchen, with line cooks, prep stations, dishwashers, just calling it all the chef, and then wondering how one single guy chops carrots and washes dishes simultaneously. No way, right? We squish diverse functions into a single word and boom, we've created a completely artificial mystery. Keep this concept in your back pocket because it's the culprit behind the biggest debates in science right now.
Moving to Section 2, the myth of one mind.
Let's zoom in to the microscale to see how this ontological compression literally ruins our understanding of consciousness. Check out this comparison. Over on the left, we've got the secular soul. This is how modern philosophy often treats consciousness, as this presumed invisible interior unity that matter somehow magically produces. But the text proposes the right side instead, what it calls a decompositional repair ecology, which sounds like a mouthful, but it just means replacing an old, inherited master category with a multidimensional map of distinct, measurable capacities. Much more useful, right?
And this brilliantly illustrates what we actually mean when we throw around the word mind. Look at these capacities. We've got sensory discrimination, affect evaluation, selective attention, memory formation, predictive modeling, metacognition, and linguistic report. The mind is actually this brilliant, messy assembly of all these varied capacities working together. It's definitely not just one single phenomenon. I mean, think about it. A creature might have selective attention without linguistic report. So simply asking, is it conscious, completely misses this incredible, multidimensional reality.
So, what about the famous hard problem of consciousness? Well, it actually becomes a promise story mystery when it's posed way too early, without decomposing those capacities first. If we jump straight to the hard problem before separating out functions like memory and attention, we're basically demanding an explanation for a mystery that we partly produce through our own language compression. We absolutely have to decompose the functions before we can identify what's genuinely left to explain.
Section 3, the myth of many universes. All right, we are pivoting now from the false unity of the mind at the microscale straight to the false plurality of the cosmos at the macroscale. Now, what's really interesting about this is a 2026 headline that actually claimed dying gravastars spawn many universes. Physicists Jambopolsky and Rizzola created this stunning model of an expanding de Sitter region inside collapsing stellar matter. And look, it's absolutely incredible physics. But it was a bit of an overeager leap by the headline writers. It exposes a huge conceptual problem we have. Cosmologists are confusing an isolated physical domain with an entirely new totality. They literally mistook a fascinating region for a brand new reality.
I absolutely love this quote from the source text. There is no outside, only exits. Just think about that spatial metaphor for a second. An inflationary bubble, or a quantum branch, or the inside of a collapsing star. Sure, it might exit our observational reach, or maybe our topological region. But exiting a relation never ever places something outside of everything. An exit is just a discontinuity within existence. It is not a passage beyond reality.
Let's walk through this vocabulary of repair to really clarify our cosmological semantics. So, the universe is the unrestricted totality of physical reality. The observable universe is just the region reachable by information. A cosmological domain is a region with distinct geometry. A branch is a theory-specific divergence, and a world is an internally articulated domain. So, a dying star might create a new domain or a new world, absolutely. But all of these distinct regions, they still belong to one shared reality, the universe.
So the absolutely crucial point here is this: causal isolation is not ontological independence. Just because an inflationary bubble or a quantum branch is totally cut off from us, meaning, we can't send or receive any signals from it, doesn't mean it exists independently outside the universe. It still shares a generating structure. Separation simply does not equal a second totality. Moving on to Section 4, the ultimate container.
Okay, we're zooming way out to the meta level here to resolve the tension between these micro and macro errors. And this introduces a beautifully unifying concept called container monism. Basically, the universe is one, but only as the unrestricted scope of existence. It's a real unity of exhaustive inclusion. The universe isn't some giant physical substance, and it's definitely not just the largest object in the room that grounds everything else. Rather, it's the ultimate container. Whatever exists, however it exists, falls within its scope.
But you might be wondering, why not traditional monism, where everything stems from one simple, unified source? Well, the source calls this the kill shot to monism. An absolutely undifferentiated one cannot generate the differences we see around us without presupposing them. I mean, if a source is perfectly simple, there's no operative distinction to generate succession, transformation, or individuation. You just can't get the complex plurality of life and physics from a completely blank simplicity without smuggling in differences right from the start.
So we resolve this simply by splitting the concept. Structural monism means the scope of inclusion is singular. The container itself is one. But generative pluralism means there are multiple forms and processes constantly differentiating within it. Reality remains totally entangled, without ever having to become one big uniform blob.
And our final section, Section 5, the triadic minimum. Let's move to and see how this builds. If the container is singular, but the contents inside are plural, what are the structural rules for everything that exists within it? Well, for any local formation to actually exist and be determinate within the universe, it requires a minimum of 3 roles. We can call it the 3+ rule. 1, a local term, like a pattern or a signal. 2, a field of difference relative to that term. And 3, a relation or operation that makes that distinction effective. Nothing in the universe is truly just a standalone one. Everything is an ongoing, dynamic relation. Just look at how perfectly this ties our whole journey together. On the left, we have the false singularity, where we mistakenly compress distinct mental capacities into one soul. And on the right, the false plurality, where we mistakenly promoted cosmological domains into multiple universe totalities. The exact same language error, ontological compression, trapped us at both extreme ends of reality. Crazy, right?
And here is the grand synthesis, elegantly stated. The universe is one. Nothing in it is. The container of existence, that unrestricted scope we talked about, is singular. But absolutely everything inside of it, from a fleeting thought in your head to a supermassive black hole, is an active, ongoing, plural assembly.
Which brings us to a final, really provocative thought to leave you with. The universe is one, and everything in it is plural. So when you look at your own reality, your mind, your environment, your work, you aren't looking at isolated, indivisible objects. You are looking at a dynamic, interconnected assembly of processes. So what plural processes will you assemble next? Thank you so much for exploring this fascinating framework with me today on this explainer, and keep questioning the structures of our reality.